Listen carefully. In this mystery, the killer does not give themselves away with fingerprints, a confession, or a dramatic mistake. They give themselves away with one sentence. One small detail. One lie about the weather. Tonight, you are not just watching a detective story. You are part of the interrogation. 5 suspects will speak. 4 will hide something. 1 will lie about the murder. And before the reveal, you will have every clue you need to spot the liar yourself, at a glass house on the cliffs of Cornwall. Inside that house, a man named Julian Cross was found dead in his private, exposing other people's secrets. He built an audience by asking one question over and over. How do you know when someone is lying? By midnight, that question belonged to him, because one of the 5 people in his house had killed him. And one of them was about to lie straight to Detective Mara Vale. The question is, can you spot the liar in 15 minutes? Are you excited? Please like, share, and subscribe. Let's start this case.
Julian Cross lived in a house made almost entirely of glass. During the day, it was a display of wealth and clean lines, but at night, during a storm, the structure feels exposed, each flash of lightning turning the rooms white, while waves break against the cliff below. Julian was 44, a man who built his life on drama and absolute control. As one of Britain's most famous investigative podcasters, he didn't just tell stories, he presided over them. His show, The Last Lie, reached millions of listeners. Every episode ended with a public dismantling, a corrupt official, a fake charity founder, a witness caught in a contradiction. Julian called this justice. On the night he died, Julian stepped away from the microphone and invited 5 specific people to his isolated home for dinner. These guests were people harboring secrets that Julian had either already exposed or was currently holding over their heads. By trapping himself in an isolated, volatile environment with 5 people who had every reason to want him gone, Julian created a vacuum of control. At 8 p.m., the guests gathered around a long black dining table. Outside, the rain was relentless, striking the glass behind them in heavy sheets. Evelyn Hart sat at the head. She was Julian's producer, the professional who spent 7 years building the show while Julian took the credit. As she sat down, she remarked that the storm seemed to be localized entirely over the cliff. Next was Marcus Reed, a retired police officer. Julian had recently accused him of a mistake that ruined an innocent family. Marcus sat in silence, staring at the rain and muttering that the roads back to the city were likely already washed out. Olivia Cross, Julian's sister, arrived late and visibly cold. She apologized to the table, claiming the coastal road was bone dry until she reached the house's driveway. She had spent years trying to break free from Julian's control over the family trust. There was Daniel Shaw, a rival journalist. He maintained that Julian's career was built on a major investigation stolen from his own desk years earlier. Finally, Rachel Wynne. 2 years ago, an episode of The Last Lie accused her of a charity scandal. She lost her career and reputation, and she sat at the table watching Julian with a steady, unblinking focus. With every person at the table holding a life-altering motive for revenge, the dinner began in a state of high-wire resentment. At 8:47 p.m., Julian stopped pretending to eat. He simply leaned back and watched his guests. He reached into his jacket and placed a small recorder on the table. Everyone went silent. He smiled and told them that while the device wasn't recording yet, one of them was the subject of his next episode. Evelyn looked away. Marcus folded his arms. Olivia whispered for him to stop, while Daniel asked if the entire dinner was just a stunt for content. Julian didn't answer. He had engineered this evening as a psychological interrogation, pushing the tension to a breaking point to see who would crack first. At 9:12 p.m., Julian left the table and went to his private recording studio at the back of the house. The studio was an impenetrable fortress, soundproofed walls, dark acoustic panels, and one single door. There were no windows and no other way inside. At 10:15 p.m., Evelyn Hart knocked on that door. When no one answered, she pushed it open and found Julian slumped at his desk. He had been dead for nearly an hour. The scene was a paradox. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, and no weapon. His phone was gone, but the door had been the only way in or out. The man who demanded absolute control had been killed silently inside a soundproof box, turning the dinner into an impossible locked room mystery. Detective Mara Vale arrived just before 11 p.m. She immediately moved the 5 suspects into the hallway to begin the investigation. Inside the studio, Julian's recording system was still active. On the monitor, the killer had left one saved audio file. Detective Vale played it. Julian's voice came through the speakers, sounding tired and low. He said, "One of them is lying about the rain." Then the file ended. Julian spent his final moments highlighting a specific environmental error. One of his guests had made a statement about the storm that didn't match the reality outside. Julian Cross turned his own death into the final broadcast of his career. He left the recording running, leaving it to the investigators to look back at the testimony and find the guest who miscalculated the weather.
When Julian was found dead in his recording studio, the heavy acoustic door was resting ajar. It hadn't been forced. Julian had either let his killer in, or it was someone he trusted enough not to fear. The initial police report suggested a time of death around 10:15 p.m., shortly after his producer, Evelyn, discovered the body and raised the alarm. But Detective Vale found a detail that didn't fit. Resting on the desk was a half-empty coffee cup. When she touched it, the liquid wasn't just lukewarm, it was completely cold. To reach this temperature, we have to look at the variables. In a 68-degree room, a 4-ounce pour of black coffee doesn't lose all its heat in 9 minutes. It takes closer to 35. This physical cooling curve suggests that Julian didn't die at 10:15. He was likely killed between 9:40 and 9:45 p.m. That creates a paradox with the digital evidence. The computer shows a new recording file was created at 10:06 p.m., nearly 20 minutes after the coffee suggests Julian was already dead. Evelyn explained that the studio software was sophisticated enough to schedule automated playback and recording for things like timed intros or remote interviews. If the 10:06 file was an automated digital ghost, it means the killer used the software to manufacture a false sign of life, creating a 30-minute window where they could have committed the crime and slipped away. Detective Vale began narrowing down the suspects, starting with Marcus Reed. Marcus had a digitally verified alibi, a 6-minute phone call to his wife from the front hall, starting at 9:21 p.m. Marcus also provided a crucial observation about the room itself. He claimed that even if someone were screaming inside that studio, you wouldn't hear a thing from the outside. The studio was built as a soundproof bunker. To keep the recordings pristine, the walls and doors were engineered to isolate the interior entirely. If that heavy door was closed, the acoustic seal was absolute, trapping every decibel inside the room. Other suspects, like Julian's sister Olivia and his rival Daniel, had significant motives involving inheritance and stolen research. However, neither had an alibi for the time the coffee went cold. Motive can point a finger, but it can't place a person in the room. To find the killer, Vale needed to find a break in the physical rules of the house. A potential break came from Rachel Wynn. She claimed that while she was in the conservatory at 10:05 p.m., she saw Evelyn walking down the hallway toward the studio. Evelyn confirmed this. She admitted she was at the studio door at 10:05, just 1 minute before the computer file was created. Her alibi was remarkably detailed. She claimed she stood in the hallway and heard Julian inside, recording a segment in a particularly angry tone. Evelyn added one more specific detail. She said she could clearly hear the sound of the storm's rain hitting the studio glass in the background of Julian's voice. This testimony seemed to solve the timeline. If Evelyn heard him at 10:05, Julian was alive long after the coffee should have been warm, seemingly clearing everyone who was elsewhere at that moment. But the detective found a final piece of evidence Julian had left behind on his screen, a local weather alert he had been monitoring.
It became a silent warning that someone was lying about the rain. To test Evelyn's claim, the detective had to look at the physical requirements of a recording session. If Julian was recording, as Evelyn claimed, the soundproof door had to be closed to keep out the noise of the house. But if the door was closed, the bunker spec insulation would make it impossible to hear the rain from the hallway. If the door was open, the recording would have been ruined by the storm, something a professional producer would never allow. The physics of the room prove Evelyn's story was an impossible fabrication. When we remove her testimony, the timeline aligns with the physical evidence. Julian was killed at 9:40 p.m. Evelyn used her technical expertise to stage the scene. She scheduled a pre-recorded file of Julian's voice, layered with a sound effect of rain, to play at 10:06 p.m. She then walked past the conservatory at 10:05, ensuring she was seen, and used the audio she knew was about to play to create a witness-backed alibi for a man who was already dead. It was a nearly perfect digital alibi, but in the end, the deception couldn't survive a simple confrontation with the laws of thermodynamics and the reality of a soundproof room. Julian Cross spent his life in this room, a space defined by high-end monitors, a single microphone, and a professional mixing board. To understand how he died, Detective Vale had to understand the tools he used to live. On the night of the murder, the timeline seemed definitive. At 10:06 p.m., a new file appeared on the studio's drive, capturing Julian's voice, angry and sharp, competing with the sound of a heavy downpour outside. This audio provided a seemingly ironclad alibi, but digital files carry microscopic acoustic fingerprints and metadata. These internal records document the exact physical process that created the sound. Detective Vale chose to ignore the physical evidence of the struggle. Instead, she turned to the studio software log to see if the computer's digital history matched the story being told by the speakers. Dismantling this alibi required a forensic approach, where the digital equipment, rather than the room itself, became the primary scene of the crime. The software log acted as the system's internal ledger, tracking every command processed by the workstation. There is a fundamental functional difference between a live recording and a bounce. A live recording draws a jagged waveform in real time as the microphone captures audio. A bounce is an export, a process where the computer packages existing data into a finished file. The logs show a genuine recording session occurred between 9:38 and 9:44 p.m. The 10:06 p.m. file, however, is registered strictly as a bounce. Someone manually initiated that export. Access logs show that only Julian and his producer, Evelyn Hart, had the credentials to command the system to package that audio. The 10:06 timestamp confirms that someone interacted with the computer at that hour, but it provides no evidence that Julian was alive to see it happen. To find the source of the bounced audio, Vale moved from reading metadata to analyzing the microscopic details of the sound itself. Within the 10:06 file, the sound of heavy rain masks a much smaller detail. Buried in the background is a faint, rhythmic metallic click. The timing of this anomaly is precise. The metallic click appears at the 3-second mark and repeats exactly 4 seconds later at the 7-second mark. While the studio's wall clock does produce a mechanical tick, its steady 1-second intervals fail to match the 3- and 7-second pattern found in the recording. Vale began a methodical search of the studio's archives, looking for any previous recording session that shared this specific acoustic signature. The search ended with a deleted draft from 3 weeks earlier. When compared, the two waveforms show a perfect match: the same voice fragment, the same rain, and the identical metallic click pattern. By exposing the 10:06 file as a recycled draft, the window of death shifts back to the final minutes of the last real recording session. Julian's life ended between 9:44 and 9:48 p.m., just as the 9:38 recording was cut short. To find the truth, Vale focused on the 9:38 p.m. file, the true final recording of Julian's life. Large portions of the file were corrupted, leaving behind a wall of digital noise.
Vale began parsing through the static to isolate the surviving dialogue. The audio captures a final, bitter argument. Evelyn demands the producer credit she was promised for her work, while Julian dismisses her contribution as simple employment. After a final exchange, the audio breaks into a violent wall of static. Julian's last surviving quote clarifies the motive. He tells Evelyn that while she built the show, he owns it. He was in the process of legally severing her from the brand she spent 7 years creating. Evelyn utilized her mastery of audio engineering to fabricate an alibi. In the end, the forensic trail left by her own equipment proved more durable than the digital ghost she tried to create.
A glass house on a cliff is the perfect place to record a podcast, until the owner is murdered in the middle of a storm. Julian Cross is dead, and there are only 5 people in this house who could have done it. Evelyn, the lead producer, has a clear story. She told investigators she heard Julian speaking from the hallway at 10:06 p.m. She was certain of the time because she remembered the sound of the rain lashing against the studio glass as he spoke. Her alibi depends on 4 specific details: the voice she heard, the location of the hallway, the 10:06 timestamp, and the weather. If any one of these details is physically impossible, her entire defense collapses. But Julian's final recording ended with a specific observation. One of them is lying about the rain. He knew his own timeline was about to be manipulated. In a high-stakes interrogation, a liar often feels the need to add sensory texture to their story, a sound, a smell, a feeling, to make it feel more authentic. But in a controlled environment, those extra details are exactly what investigators use to strip the lie away. When the server logs were compared to the weather data, the 10:06 alibi vanished. Julian's final real conversation ended at 9:44 p.m., while the storm was still peaking. This places his death before the rain stopped at 9:50, long before Evelyn's supposed encounter. The 10:06 file wasn't a live recording. It was an export. Someone took old audio and dropped it into a new file. Evelyn wasn't lying about hearing Julian's voice, just its source. She was listening to a digital ghost she manufactured. The logs show a real conversation at 9:38 and a sudden end at 9:44. Then, at 10:06, the system recorded a manual export from a producer's workstation. Julian was already dead at 10:06, and only one person had the credentials to move that file. Digital timestamps are the one part of a story a producer can't edit out. They narrow the investigation to the only person with the motive, the access, and the technical skill to rewrite the night's history. The studio is soundproofed. Heavy acoustic barriers block any voice from reaching the hallway. Second, precipitation data shows the storm ended at 9:50. Finally, the studio has no exterior walls, no glass for rain to hit. Evelyn's story is physically impossible. Fabricated audio cannot survive when it contradicts the rigid physical laws of the crime scene. Evelyn built a perfect digital lie, but she forgot to check the world outside the computer. For 7 years, Evelyn Hart was the ghostwriter of Julian's success. She edited the mess out of his life, rewriting his scripts and managing the legal fallout of his career, all while he took the credit. The breaking point came that night. Julian told her he was launching a new version of the show with a new team. He was stripping her of her producer title and her ownership, effectively deleting her from the show she had built. Evelyn didn't see herself as a murderer. She saw herself as an editor, removing a person who was standing in the way of her story. But while she could edit his voice, she couldn't edit the facts left behind on his desk. This case shows how years of uncredited labor can turn into a lethal sense of entitlement. In the end, Evelyn's professional instinct to fix the audio is exactly what gave her away. By the next morning, the police tape is the only thing that makes the glass house look different. It's a reminder that once the violence is over, the scene of a crime often looks as ordinary as a cold cup of coffee.
Evelyn spent her life making messy stories sound clean. She tried to apply that same logic to Julian's death, smoothing over the pauses and trying to mix a perfect alibi. The truth about deception is that it rarely fails because of a major oversight. It fails because of the small, unnecessary details a liar volunteers to sound authentic. The rain that wasn't there, the sound that couldn't be heard. Did you catch the discrepancy in the studio's architecture, or were you focused on the digital timestamps? Our next investigation moves to the tracks. A man vanishes from a moving train between two stations. No one saw him get off, but another passenger is found wearing his watch. Every crime leaves a residue. You just have to know which details to ignore and which ones to follow. We'll see you at the next station.
Now that I've convinced you are a good detective, please give this video a like, share, and subscribe. Even more exciting cases are coming soon.